Hello and welcome back to my workshop. In this video, I'm going to present to you my build of the FOS Scale Models Kit of the Month number 3 from March of 2019 for Sincere Towing. This is a very simple Craftsman kit. It has only a few parts and it is actually still available to order on the FOS Scale website. A lot of their earlier kits of the month are available in direct order, so you don't need to go back and try to find one that you missed. Certainly they're not all available, but there are a few out there, and this is one of them, so I thought it would be a good one to start with since it is still available. The kit includes the normal things you find inside a Craftsman kit. The instructions are very basic. They don't include an awful lot of information. I read through them. It's basically just an overview on how to build a Craftsman kit. There's not a lot of information specific to this model, so there wasn't much there. The diagram for the bracing did prove to be very useful and accurate. I braced the model pretty much exactly the way it says to do it in there, and that turned out quite nice. This is the laser etched thin card for the roof. We have one set of walls and another set of walls, and those are laser cut from scribed wood with all horizontal boards. Then we have a very thin piece of card with door details and window details on it. And this is the two pieces that make up the base, cut from one piece, and a small packet of detail parts, which I ended up not using anything out of this package of detail parts. It is still sealed up. And this right here is a color code showing the different sizes of strip wood that are included in FOS Scale kits. And that's proved to be very handy. And although I needed a lot more strip wood that was included for what I did. The roof is a very, very thin piece of card, and it has 3 sections. And this is what they included for making tar paper with. I'm not going to use it. I far prefer shingles on my roofs rather than tar paper. So I'm going to use these Northeastern Scale Models, pre-assembled shingles and pre-weathered shingles on this one. I have never used this product, so this is going to be a new experience for me. If it looks good, it looks like a very handy, convenient way to make a decent looking roof. So we'll see how it works out for us. The first thing I'm going to do is remove all of the individual parts. Sometimes I mark the parts of the kits with the numbers that they're going to be if there's a lot of similar parts in a kit. This kit, there's not a lot of similar parts. There's not a lot of things you can mix up. So it's easier just to cut everything apart, and it's very obvious how things get assembled on this one, so there's no reason to mark anything up front. I found the pieces came out of the cardboard and wood carriers very good. The laser cutting on this kit was top notch. Everything was very simple to take apart and required minimal cleanup, so I was very happy with that. Once everything is all apart and laid out, I decided to look at how it was going to all fit together. There's one wall for the little add-on that was actually included in the opening for the door. That was the only part that was a little bit tricky to get out. I marked the one side with the front and back so that I could keep everything aligned as I was building it. I traced the slope of the roof onto the false front, and that provided me a guide on where to glue the bracing there. The instructions said to do that, and it worked quite well. I'm going to put a false interior inside this building, so I'm marking both of the side walls an equal distance from the end, where I'm going to put a piece of bracing that will hold the interior wall in place. That's a piece I'm going to have to make. Of course, it's not included with the kit. Then I line the two pieces up and butt them up against a straight edge. I just used a 1, 2, 3 block as a straight edge. And then I drew the line right down both of them together. And that way I know that the line is the same on both walls. I put an arrow so I know which side of the line to glue the bracing to. For the interior walls, I'm going to use this board and batten sheet. It has just a little bit of texture to it. I think when you look at it through the door openings, and see the interior, it's going to look okay. The one interior wall is just going to be an identical duplicate as far as the size goes to the end wall. So I just put the end wall on the piece of paper, and I just traced it out and made an exact copy. Always use a straight edge when you do your first cuts. Even if you're trying to follow a line with the knife and you're very careful, the knife will walk around a bit. So using a steel straight edge as a guide is always time well spent. I like to make several passes and just let the knife do its work. Don't push down too hard. That way there's very little chance you'll break anything. And when I got it all cut out, I put the two pieces together and verified they were in fact the same size, dimensionally equivalent to one another. That way I knew it would work. I'm also going to have one interior wall that's going to be glued to the inside of the exterior wall, and that will be able to be seen through the large side entrance. So I just measured it the same height as the sidewall, and I cut the piece off. And I'm going to leave this as one piece right now. After I get the end wall glued in place, I will measure this up against the model and I will cut it to size later. For right now, I'm just cutting it to height so I can get it painted and primed while I'm painting and priming everything else. This is how the interior walls will fit together, and I'm only making two interior walls. You're not going to be able to see any other interior besides these two walls. There's only two large door openings, so this is what will be visible. I took everything out to the paint booth and I primed it up with gray primer. Then I very carefully used a file and I removed some of the paint from the corner braces where everything was put together, and that's going to give the wood glue something extra good to bite into. Wood glue holds much better if you put it on bare wood rather than wood that's been primed. So I removed the primer where I knew there was going to be glue. And this is the back side of all the pieces. You can see the bracing on all of them. And it's time to start assembly. I'm just using a regular wood glue that I purchased at the Home Depot. I keep it in a different bottle. And the first part I glued together was the dormer assembly that goes up on top. And then I glued together the pieces that make up the little lean-to addition. And I used 1x1 steel blocks to hold those together. Then I glued up the first section of the main building's wall and the second section and kept them all squared up against the grid. And using 1, 2, 3 blocks, I put pressure on them while they dried. Working very carefully, I was able to keep everything nice and square. I allowed everything to dry overnight. No reason to rush this and have anything go wrong. These are all the doors and windows that came with the kit. There's Tichy windows that go in 4 places, and I just had 4 Tichy windows that were the exact same ones as came with the kit, so I use those. I'm only going to wind up using 3 of the windows because I'm moving the lean-to to a different part of the building, and it's going to cover up one of the other windows. This door that goes on the side of the lean-to is made of 2 pieces. The windows that go in the dormer in the front are also made of 2 pieces, but I don't think I'm going to use those, and I'm really not a big fan of the side door either. I have this door in my scrap box, and it might be a contender. I also have this door from Tichy, and it fits perfectly into the hole. And I like the depth that this door has better than the one that's included in the kit, so I think I'll use that. For this front window, I'm also going to use a Tichy window. The Tichy window that I'm using for the front is number 8105, and it's just a little bit bigger than the one that came in the kit, so I had to trim some material away to get it to fit, but it worked out okay. For the dormer, I also am going to use a Tichy window. I'm using a number 8023, and I had to enlarge that hole slightly also. And I couldn't tell which part of the window was the top and the bottom, so I may have glued it in upside down, but that's okay. I don't think very many people will ever notice. This is the side door. I haven't decided if I'm going to use it either. It's just kind of flat, but I don't know if I have one that will fit. These front doors, I'm going to glue in so they open inward. Not very much of them is going to be visible, so I think they will be fine. So, setting aside the pieces that I'm not going to use, the Tichy castings just look better, at least to my eye. This is a cast metal awning that I have left over from some kit. It may actually even be an N scale part. I'm going to use it as an awning over the front door. I think it's going to be just fine. It's time to start painting. I do the painting by building it up in several layers. The building itself is primed gray to start with, but then I like to dab in some darker gray. I did not prime the dormer. The dormer pieces are very small. There's hardly anything to paint, so I just started with them with the second step, which is a darker gray. On the main building, I'm just smearing some of this darker gray on there, horizontal strokes across. None of this is going to be very visible when it's done. This is just building up layers of different color. So when I sponge on the final color, it will have depth to it. This is a craft paint I just had in my drawer. I'm going to sponge it onto the model. Again, 90% of this is going to be covered when the model is done. So just not being very neat, just dabbing it on. Smearing and dabbing. Just want to get some cover on here. And I'm using this paint because it is cheap and it doesn't cover very well. And I want those two colors of gray to kind of add some depth to the building as it goes through. The dormer is rather fragile, so you have to be careful as you sponge it. Those last couple bits of the triangular parts might be pretty easy to break off. Everything looks like it's got a good base coat on it. Now this is a color sample from the Home Depot that I had mixed. It is a color they call heavy cream. It is a kind of off-white color. I just went to the Behr paint section at Home Depot, chose the color that I wanted. This paint sample was only a few dollars. I don't have to worry about what craft sample paints I can find or whatever. I got to pick out exactly the color that I wanted. This is the color the building's going to be. I like to use these disposable brushes to scoop the paint out and just set it onto my cardboard palette. I buy these cardboard pieces from Amazon. They come in a pack of 50 for just a few dollars. And I like using that better than, some people use paper towels to sponge off the excess. The cardboard seems to work great. These sheets are less than 20 cents a piece when you buy in bulk. So just use it and throw it away. I'm just using a torn up piece of sponge to dab the color on. This I'm not going to smear. I'm not going to brush it. Everything is getting dabbed on with the sponge here. I want that random pattern and I want the texture to make it look like old paint that's just beginning to peel. I'm not going for a dilapidated look. I want it to look like it's a building that's being used and it's, a profitable business. It's just not in new condition anymore. Again, being careful on the dormer not to break anything. And that's all the pieces. Scooping a little bit out. I have so much paint, there's no reason to conserve it. Just use as much as you need. And now using a brush, I'm going to go over the boards. And the more I do this, the newer it makes it look. So I have to be careful to stop before I make it look pristine. This is not supposed to be a pristine building. This is a cheap disposable brush that I'm using. Cleaning house paint out of a quality brush is rather difficult, so this is a good time to use one of those craft store paint brushes that's only a few cents. Make it one use and then just dispose of it. Doesn't make sense to even clean it out. I like this color. It looks white, but it's definitely not white. I always try to avoid pure white in anything that I do. Pure white just looks kind of glaring in photographs. I did a pretty good job not getting paint into the gray that separated the horizontal board pieces. Looks kind of like individual board by board construction. The color turned out just a little bit different. That's all that gray and other underlying colors that changed it. I think this is going to be just fine. Here's a picture of the mock-up of the building with the paint on it and the pieces in position. Just an idea of what it's going to look like, checking our progress as we go along. I think it's looking good. At this point, I have already painted all of the 1/16 trim, and I have glued it in place in the corners and around the perimeter of the false front of the building. When I made the video of this process, it would not unload from my camera into my computer, so I cannot present it here. All I can do is show you this one still picture of me gluing the trim on the false front and using a 1-2-3 block to weigh it down. The instructions say to use the 1/16 trim also around the garage door on the front of the building, and I didn't like the way that looked. So I decided to go with something just a hair larger and use 3/32 of an inch square around this opening so it would protrude from the front just a bit, look a little more heavy duty. I always use steel wool to trim the fuzz off of basswood when I'm using it. It just makes the finished product look better and makes it look a lot less toy-like. I painted the trim gray and I painted the windows dark green. I thought that gave a nice contrast. The gray that I used is Vallejo's color for German Luftwaffe uniform gray. It's got a little hint of blue to it, and I kind of liked the way it looked. I wasn't sure what to do with the back of the false front. So for right now, I've just painted it with the same color gray as I use on the trim, and I'm going to see if I like the way that looks when I'm done. Then I cut the 3/32 of an inch trim to the right length, and I'm going to glue it into place inside the garage door opening. And this is where those two larger doors are going to go. I left the vertical pieces a little bit long. After the glue dries, I trimmed them to the correct length. And then I'm going to glue in the false wall that goes along the back of the main section of this building. And this is the piece that I cut from the board and batten siding. And I'm just going to put a little bit of glue on these supports and then push this piece up to it. And this is actually going to make this building much more durable, also having a solid wall in the center of it. And with it pressed in place, I'm going to set it aside to dry. I'm going to mark the interior wall the right length now. I don't need to measure it. I can just hold it up to the building and get an exact trace from that. I'm going to line up the board to the lines on my grid paper, and then I'm going to use this straight edge to line it up across grids going the other direction. This will give me a 90-degree cut without having to do any fancy measurement. I coat the back of the wood with wood glue, and then I just put it into the building, press it into place. These two pieces of cardboard are going to protect the surfaces from the clamps, and I'm going to put 4 of these plastic X-Acto clamps onto it and tighten them up. And when they're all tight, I'm going to let this dry overnight. Now this is going to be something that's not included in the kit at all. I want this building to be on a waterfront in the town of Port Annabelle, and I made this little template right here to make a dock section. I was going to have a dock section on the back side of the building, but I don't know how much room I'm going to have here, and this extra ½ inch hanging off the backside where nobody can see it looks like it's just not going to be a good idea. So I'm going to trim that off my template, and I'm going to make the building just that much smaller. This will still be fine. It's going to get exactly the look that I want. Modeling things on the side of the building that really can't be seen isn't time well spent. So I've carefully marked out where this dock is going to be that goes around the outside of the building. You're going to be able to see the dock through the big doors that's going to form the floor on the inside. I'm going to make the dock surface out of scale lumber. This is all from Northeastern. The deck boards are going to be scale 2x8s. The runners that go down the side are going to be scale 8x8s. The stringers are going to be 6x6s. And the diagonal braces are going to be scale 2x6s. I'm going to use the Northwest Short Line chopper to cut everything to length. I'm using the template as a guide to set the stop, and then I'm going to cut a whole bunch of scale 2x8s, and these are going to be the boards that make up the surface of the deck. I ended up using over 25 actual feet of scale lumber to make this dock. If you wonder why Craftsman kits that include a lot of scale lumber are expensive, that's why. They take a tremendous amount of scale lumber to make anything that you build up board by board. I'm cutting the stringers out of the 6x6 here, just using a number 11 X-Acto knife to make a few short cuts, and it separates. These are bamboo skewers that I get at Publix, and I have found in many years of modeling that nothing makes a better piling for a dock than a simple bamboo barbecue skewer. I cleaned up all of that scale lumber that I cut, all over 30 feet of it, with 000 steel wool. And that took a fairly good amount of time, but what it did is it left a big mess of steel wool chunks on my workbench. These chunks can be very aggravating if you get them under your skin and your fingernails. If you get one in your eye, that can really be a serious tragedy. I use one of these inexpensive permanent magnets that are about 1.25 inches in diameter, and I run it very carefully back and forth over the entire work area where I was cleaning these wood pieces up with steel wool. And I pick up as much of the steel as possible with this magnet. And you can see by looking at the magnet, even after I had swept and vacuumed this, the magnet picked up a lot of small steel wool pieces. Then, to make even more sure, I take duct tape and I tear pieces of the duct tape off to cover the entire work surface where I was working with the steel wool, and I press it down firmly into the work surface and then pull the duct tape back off carefully. This is an AK Interactive product called Track Wash, and this is not Track Wash for model railroad tracks. This is Track Wash for military models. I decided I was going to try this AK Interactive product to stain the deck that I'm using for this building. And I hope I wind up with a nice dark brown decking surface with a little bit of variation from board to board, and I hope it looks really good. I don't want this to look old and weathered and run down. I want this to look like a dock that's been maintained, been treated, and is being well taken care of. So using another one of my disposable brushes, I am just going to brush this AK Interactive stain down each and every piece that I'm using for this dock. I have to cover the stringers and the supports on all 4 sides. The deck boards that go on the surface, I'm only going to hit on the top and the sides. I'm not going to cover the bottom on those. I decided to build a deck for this building. The floor that came with the kit was just a floor, and it just served as a base for the building. I'm going to put this building in a waterfront scene, and I want it on a deck that goes out over the water. And I decided to scratch build this board by board using a technique that's very much similar to the way that most fine scale miniature loading docks are built. So the deck is made from stained pieces of 2x8s, 6x6s, and 8x8s. And there's some 2x6s for the diagonal. So the first step is to build this piece right here, which only has 3 pieces glued in place. I'm going to put the weights on it to let it dry. And this will form the basis of the deck itself. When this glue dries, I will assemble the rest of the deck onto this, but for right now I just need to make sure it's going to be square while these first pieces dry, and then I'll assemble the decking later. So when the glue dries, I get out my square and I make sure that the deck is squared up. And then I would begin the process of gluing each individual board to the deck. And again, I'm just using regular wood glue for this, not high strength, not Type Bond 3, not any of those crazy ones, just general purpose wood glue. Works just fine. And the boards go in one at a time, and I'm just grabbing them at random from the pile and gluing them into place. This shorter section right here that uses the shorter boards, I measured carefully, and I made sure that the boards would fit in there perfectly, which they did. This second section, which is the longer section, I'm going to assemble it out to where it gets near the end board, and then I cut the end board off and just leave it like that. The end board is only there just to make sure that the stringers stay parallel while I assemble the deck. This is what the finished deck looks like after all the boards are glued in place. I am very happy with the way this turned out. The variation in board color looks very nice. This might be one of the best decks I've ever built. And this is it with the building sitting on top of it. And I think the size is right. I think the proportions are right. I think this will fit in the scene quite well. So far, so good. For the pilings, there's going to be 6 sets of pilings along the bottom. And I'm going to build a jig to assemble these pilings because there's round pieces, there's square pieces, there's cross bracing, and it's a very difficult thing to keep all together unless you have some sort of a jig. So I grab an 80 thousandths sheet of plastic, and I'm going to transfer with the pencil to where the stringers locate onto this piece. And then I'm going to build the jig out of plastic, and the wood glue doesn't stick to plastic very well, so I can glue the pieces together and then just pop it off. And then using a square, I mark up where the pilings are going to be set. And these pilings are just made out of bamboo skewers, which are just fantastic items to use for making pilings for seafront scenes. You can buy a pack of 100 of them from Publix for less than $2. That's one of the best modeling supply secrets there is out there. So using some 100 by 100 thousandths evergreen styrene, I'm going to cut that into some short blocks. And those short blocks are going to make up the basis for what becomes the jig. I'm going to glue one long piece across the top, and that will be the top of all the pilings. And that makes sure that the top of the pilings is flat, so when I glue it to the deck base, they all make contact, and it becomes pretty strong. And 100 thousandths by 100 thousandths styrene is plenty big to get a lot of gluing surface on. It's plenty big to hold everything nice and square. When I'm done with this jig, it will just be thrown away. Here's the small pieces I'm cutting up that are going to make the guides to hold the pilings square. They get glued on with Tester's model glue. There's going to be one glued on each side of that little space that I drew for the piling pieces. Now, one downside to using bamboo skewers for your pilings is they're not all exactly the same diameter. So I always make my piling guides just a little bit wider when I do this, or I try to find the widest piling that I have and use that one as my guide. And I glued a second horizontal piece across the 3 pilings that are short to make sure that I don't accidentally glue a long piling where there should be a short piling, but that piece is just there to make sure I don't glue a piece in the wrong place. It doesn't actually align anything. And this is what the finished guide looks like. It has the end piling in it right now, the one that's shorter. That's the one that goes underneath the little addition to the building. So there's 6 pilings, and there's 2 that are different. The shorter one has fewer pilings, and the one that's next to the shorter one has an extra piling that lines up with the end of the short piling. And I just dab a little bit of glue on the end of the bamboo skewers, stick them in place in the jig. The jig holds everything in place, and then I pop it out. And here I cut the 2x6s into shorter pieces, and I use the 2x6s as the diagonal bracing. When I got done with this model, I thought the 2x6 bracing was a little bit heavy. I probably should have used 2x4 diagonal bracing, but most docks that I've worked on use 2x6 diagonal bracing, but I don't remember it actually looking this thick. One little dot of wood glue at each spot. I use an X-Acto knife to pick up the cross brace, and then just drop the cross brace right into place and continue on down the line until all the cross braces are in place. Now it's time to glue all the finished piling assemblies to the bottom of the deck. And the first one I'm going to start with is the one on the end. This is the one that's different, that has the extra piling that lines up with the short end. And the only reason I start with this one is so I don't accidentally glue it in somewhere else. This one I could make a mistake and glue it in the wrong spot, so I'm going to take and glue it in place first, and then the 4 long ones are all the same, and I don't need to worry about mixing them up. After it's set in place, I'm going to bracket it in place with some 1, 2, 3 blocks to hold it vertical. And don't mess with these until the glue is dried. Once the glue is dried, you're not going to mess it up. But if you take the 1, 2, 3 blocks off and try to glue other ones in place before the glue is dried, they're going to sag over just a little bit. So this is one of those things that takes 15, 20 seconds on the video that actually takes 2 or 3 days to do in actuality. For the center one, I'm going to mark the board on the bottom where it lines up so I know where to put the glue dots. And then when I fill in the last 2 pieces, same thing, mark the boards with the pencil, and then you know where it goes. And these were a little bit too close together to use 1, 2, 3 blocks to square them up, so I just used small steel squares to square them up. It only grabs the piling near the top, but that's fine. It holds it square. And 2 or 3 days later, when all the glue is dry, I take the pilings out that held it in place, and look at that. That deck turned out beautiful. I'm very happy with the way that AK Interactive track wash worked on these boards. That looks gorgeous. I couldn't be happier with the way that deck turned out. With all of the uprights glued in place on the bottom of the deck, it's time to add cross bracing to the fronts and the backs. All the cross bracing on the sides was put in place before the verticals were glued in place. So now we're going to just add this to the front, and it's going to be done in 2 rows of X's in the front, but I'm only going to add diagonals to the back. I am also not going to add the second set of diagonals behind the front one that would normally be there. You're just not going to be able to see it anyway, and at some point you have to just make a decision that a certain amount of effort is enough effort. Modeling things that can't be seen is something I've always considered to be time wasted and effort wasted and material wasted. So since it's not possible to really see the second row of cross bracing behind the first row of cross bracing, especially with all the side cross bracing in place, there's no reason to add it. So all the cross bracing was put in place across the front. And then I went about doing it in the back. Now the back is going to be 90% invisible. It's going to be almost right up against the backdrop. So all I'm going to do in the back is add a single diagonal. Now it's time to cut out the cardboard for the roof. The kit comes with a very thin sheet of cardboard. For a lot of applications, especially small buildings, I like to make my roofs out of thicker cardboard. This cardboard here that I'm using is 50 thousandths of an inch thick. It's 1¼ millimeters. That thickness, while it's way too thick to represent sheathing, it actually does a fairly good job of representing eaves. So you just glue it on and paint it, and it looks like eaves underneath the shingles. It's a quick way to make a nice finished looking roof. It's also very sturdy. Another problem that I had with the roof that came with the FOS Scale model is the roof just barely hung off the side of the building. It was maybe 1/16 of an inch larger than the wall. And that just doesn't look right to me. I like my roofs to hang off, at least 2 scale feet from the edge of the wall, maybe even a little bit further. So I just went ahead and made my own roof. I'm putting shingles on it anyway. I'm not using the FOS Scale tar paper material that they included in the kit. So everything's getting made new, and that's the process I'm going to use for it. I marked the cardboard with these right angle symbols where the factory cuts are. They're probably more accurate than what I can make, so it's nice to know where the good machine to corner is to start from when you make your measurements. And I also drew a squiggly line down the side. That represents the factory cut side also. And I was going to use that as the good side, but then I realized that when they stamped these at the factory, they didn't really do a very perfect job, and my cuts with the X-Acto knife were better. So I think I might leave those steps off in the future when I use this material. And I marked the cardboard for the width of the roof, and I then very carefully cut it out. And this piece right here is my main roof section. And when I cut it right in the middle, that is going to be what I use for the ridge, the peak in the center of the roof. This cut's not going to go all the way through. It's just going to be there so I can bend the roof. Just like that. And you can see, comparing to the original roof, how much larger my new roof is. I put it on there, size it up. I think that looks good. Now I'm going to cut out the 2 pieces of roofing material that I'm going to use for the main building roof. For these pieces, I'm going to use some of the roofing material that goes all the way to the end, so I get a nice clean end on the main roof. For the add-on and the dormer, I'm going to use ends that I cut. So I'm cutting 2 sections off of the original piece, and both of them will go all the way to the end. And then I'll have those end pieces of material for shingles at the edge of my roof. When you're cutting this for the horizontal ridge where it goes up to the center, I found out that the shingles are not really installed perfectly in a line. So measure carefully and use a steel straight edge and get your edge perfect. Don't follow the shingles. They're not quite straight, which is fine. Then I cut the second piece off. Check it for size. Looks good. Then I have to cut the 2 smaller pieces, one for the add-on and one for the dormer. You can see where I tore 1 row of shingles off this piece and left the uneven edge of shingles showing on the bottom. That's what I want. These 2 pieces right here don't have a nice straight edge like the main roof does. And just using the cardboard pieces as a guide, I cut them out. Then I use a whole bunch of 1, 2, 3 blocks and steel weights to hold the shingles in place on the roof sections while the glue dries. It's very, very important you weight these because they will warp if you don't. And a warped roof is very difficult to deal with. It is very easy to make sure it dries flat just by using enough weights. So this is time well spent. Now I'm going to install the cast metal piece of the awning that's going over the main door. I drilled it for 2 32 thousandths of an inch pins. The pins are glued in place. And now I'm going to drill 2 holes in the main building using a number 65 drill bit. And that's going to make holes for those 2 brass pins to go through. This is a much better joint than just trying to glue the edge of it to the building. So there's 1 hole on each side of the door. Then I take some super glue and get it all around this piece, all the way across the top. And you don't need very much. You just need enough to make contact. Then I push that piece through the 2 holes that I drilled. For the side door, I just wasn't happy with the side door that came with the kit. So I found this engine house door that I had in my scrap box, and I measured it up, and the small piece on the bottom cut out of the engine house door actually is just about the right size to be the side door for this building. So I found a piece I could use that looks better than the one that came with the kit, and I'm happy with that. It's just a little bit larger than it should be. I'm not going to worry about that. I could trim the sides down and make it look a little more suitable, but I just used it like it was. This wooden piece is called hat trim, and it has a profile that resembles a hat with a brim. I'm going to cut 1/2 of the hat off and make it into basically an L-shaped pattern, and I'm going to use that over the door as the upper door guide. And it does a good job representing the upper door guide. There's no visible hardware on the top of the door. There's no pulleys or anything like that that needs to be modeled. It would all be concealed underneath this track. And it just makes the job easier, and it gives the door a very nice finished look when the whole model is assembled and painted. And you could do the same thing with a piece of angle or something like that. I just like the slightly thicker profile that you get if you use a piece of hat trim. And I had it on hand, so that was handy. That looks like it's going to be just perfect. That will have to be glued in place, and eventually it will have to be painted up to match the rest of the trim on the building. The trim on the building, I went with a bluish gray, and I did all the windows in green. And they're not that different of a color from each other, and it doesn't really show up well in photographs, but they're different. But it's a nice contrast having gray trim and green doors. I like the way it looks. I've never done this on a building before. I've always done trim and doors and windows all the same color. For lighting the building, I'm going to use these lights from the Home Depot that I got on the clearance section from their Christmases several years ago. These are what they call a C3 LED warm faceted light. These are very, very appropriate, as it turns out, for doing building interior lighting. This is the first time I ever tried it. This is a new experience for me using these lights. And the facets act like a Fresnel lens, and they push the light out in all different directions. So you don't get a harsh unidirectional light that you do with like surface mount LEDs. The light kind of spreads out, and being that it's a warm light, it's not very obtrusive. But I've never used them, so I wasn't sure exactly how to wire them up. So the very first LED in the string has 3 wires going to it instead of 2. I'm not even going to mess with that one. That one just goes right in the trash. But all the rest of the LEDs just have 2 wires going to it, so I know what they do. One's positive and one's negative, and I can figure it out, and I can make it work. So I separated a few of the LED lights. I'm only going to use one in this model, and I'm going to experiment with them and figure out how they work. I have no idea what the voltage is for them. I have no idea which is positive, which is negative. I don't have a clue how these are. So I hook up 2 wires to my regulated voltage supply, and I started out at 12 volts, and it glows very, very bright at 12 volts. So I found that if I back it off to about 6 volts, I get a nice warm glow like I like. And these are great. They only work one direction, so I mark the wire that I use the black lead on with a black Sharpie, so I know which one gets the black wire. The leads are way too short, so I'm going to have to add something to them before I use them. This is the light mounted inside the building. I just drilled a hole and glued it in place. It is up there above the window, but there is a problem because the light can shine directly out the dormer. And I don't want you to be able to see the light inside the building. So I made this little modesty panel to glue in place inside the roof to block that light from shining directly into the dormer. And that's going to get glued in place, and that's going to solve that problem. I glued the modesty panel in place, and I added a small piece of square strip wood to it to reinforce it, so I don't need to worry about it ever falling out. These 2 wooden blocks are there to hold 2 chimneys in place. I'll get to that later. Gluing those wooden blocks in place makes mounting the chimneys much more secure. So I set the roof in place, and now you can see that bulb won't be able to shine directly out the dormer window. I soldered some very fine wire to this. The amperage draw on this is so low it doesn't even show up on my regulated voltage supply. That means they're drawing less than 1/100th of an amp. So this 22 gauge wire has plenty capacity to carry the amperage for this circuit. I solder the red and the black leads to it, and I always use heat shrink tubing to seal and protect my wire connections once they're in place. So they're soldered and they're heat shrunk. These are never going to cause me problems. And I hooked it up, regulated it down to 6 volts, and that interior light is glowing quite nicely. It actually shows up a lot brighter in this picture right here, but you can see you can't see the light directly through the dormer. Light's coming through the 2 big windows. You're going to be able to see the interior on the inside. That's all very nice. I also added some adhesive aluminum tape to the inside of the roof. This is going to go right around where the light bulb is. This is going to serve 2 purposes. Number 1, this aluminum tape is completely opaque. So there's no chance that the roof will be glowing from the light bulb being so close to the roof. It's not going to allow any light to penetrate through the roofing material. I hate the way glowing roofs look. And another thing it does is it reflects the light back down that comes off the top of the bulb. Now I need to cut a hole in the deck surface for the wires to pass through. And I kind of thought this out ahead of time, so I extended this one extra stringer further over from the side than it needed to be. And that's going to give me a nice square right there where I can cut out 3 boards and make the space for the wires to pass through. I trimmed the boards with the X-Acto knife. I'm not trying to cut them all the way through. I get the point where I can see that the knife is beginning to come through. And then I switched to a number 17 blade. And with a number 17 chisel blade, I just rock it down gently until the boards pop free. And when I feel them pop free, I go to the top side. And since they're already been creased with the number 11 blade, I can just push them out through the bottom and not damage the deck in any way. There they go, nice and clear. And now I have a square hole I can pass the wires through. The wires feed through there quite nicely. I'm going to leave the connections inside the building, so I push the wires up inside the building a little bit. You'll be able to see them through the one window, but you won't be able to see through that window unless you get a mirror and look down behind the building and look at it, because it will be up near the backdrop, way out of the line of sight. Well, I got that perfectly, exactly where I wanted it to be. And then I glued the building to the deck, and I weighed it down with a whole bunch of steel blocks to make sure that the building was glued securely and didn't shift while the glue was drying. This kit only came with 3 detail parts. It came with a stack of tires, a stack of oil drums, and a vent stack. And it's supposed to be a towing company, so all that makes perfect sense. I'm not using it as a towing company, so that didn't make sense for me. So I went through my detail parts box. I just found some interesting things to add to it. I found a couple of groupings of barrels with things stacked on them. I'm pretty sure those are from Fine Scale Miniatures. I got a dolly and a chair. I've got some vent stack. I got a ventilator, 2 different trash cans. I've got a barrel full of garbage, some workbenches, a shelf that goes up on the wall. There's a cart that came with some spoked wheels, but this is going on a dock. And I never worked on a dock in 1954, so I can't say for sure. But every cart that I've ever seen being used on a dock has rubber pneumatic tires on it, just because they roll so much easier down the uneven surfaces of a dock compared to hard steel wheels or hard rubber wheels. So I found these plastic wheels in my bits box that look like they're suitable for this cart, so that's what I'm going to use. So that's all the detail parts I found. I think the absolute crown thing that's in there is this pair of rubber boots. That pair of rubber boots just says this is something on a dock. On the vent stacks, I added some 32 thousandths brass rod, and you can see when I took this picture, the awning was also there with the 32 thousandths brass rod being added. It's a very simple process to just drill a number 65 hole and super glue that 32 thousandths brass rod into it. It makes it stay on the model so much better. I have these little trees that I made years and years ago for use in my paint booth, and they're just brass rods that I dropped the 32 thousandths pin in, and it holds the piece while I paint it. And you can see by the paint buildup near the top how many times these have been used. There must be a 1/16 of an inch of paint up there on the top of those. So out in the paint booth, I use the airbrush to prime everything with Rust-Oleum flat black. That is pretty much my standard color for priming all metal detail parts, whether it's for wargaming or model railroading or anything. Just Rust-Oleum flat black works fantastic. This is the first group of detail parts after they were painted, and they turned out quite nice. I like the way those rubber tires look on that cart. The workbenches turned out very, very nice, along with the shelf. It all has a lot of depth and adds a lot of character to the building. The vent stacks also got painted. Here's the drums. The casting in front is a 55-gallon drum that was cut in half and is sitting on 2 wooden blocks and is being used for scrap metal. And I just love that detail. Don't know where I got them from. I think I've got about 5 or 6 of that exact same detail part. The green thing down on the left is a mailbox I'm going to mount on the wall out front. And the last detail shows those groupings. I glued the rubber boots to the wooden crate along with a small tin drum. And I painted the door that didn't get painted with the rest of the stuff earlier because I hadn't decided what the side door was going to be. And that ventilator was painted. Now comes the part where you have to glue the detail parts into the building. And for this, you need a pair of tweezers, super glue, and a lot of patience. Now, I've already got the workbenches glued in place and the shelf on the wall, and everything's pretty much the same process as you go through. You just add a little bit of super glue to the part that you're going to glue in place, and then pick it up with a pair of tweezers and very, very carefully maneuver it into position. And this part I messed up on because this is a push cart and I didn't want it that close to the door. But when I started to put it in, I was close to the bench and everything. And by the time I set it down, the glue had set. And that's it. That's where it goes. It's staying there forever. You can do so much damage ripping something up, damaging the surface of the wood deck down below. So using the same steps and processes, I just glued all the rest of the detail parts in place. I had it all planned out ahead where they would all go, so their final positions were all known, and it was all very easy. It's just a matter of getting it done and gluing them all into place. And with that done, it's time to move on to the final steps of building assembly. For gluing the roof in place, I have to get a little bit creative. People do all kinds of different things to glue pitched roofs in place. I use these 1-inch square steel blocks, but you can't just set them on the roof because if you do, they'll fall off. So I take 2 round magnets. I put 1 round magnet on each side of it, and then I can set these to any angle that I want, and they have plenty of weight to hold the roof in place. I don't know where I picked up this trick, but it is a fantastic trick for gluing any sort of a pitched roof in place. The weights from those 1-inch square steel blocks are plenty to keep it held down while the glue dries, and it's just works very well. So here they are in position on the model, and this is a very small model, so I had to use very short blocks, but I have longer blocks for use on bigger models when that comes up. Now I'm going to glue the final 2 details in place, and these are the vent stacks and the ventilator that go on top of the main roof. And I'm going to drill a number 65 hole through the roof into those wooden blocks that I showed you earlier. And this is what those wooden blocks were glued there for. They are providing the extra contact area for that brass pin so that these will be secure and they won't fall off the building and get knocked off and damage the shingles the first time they get bumped. It's not much extra work to do this, and the benefits from it are immense. This is another one of those things where you just spend a little bit of time and you get a huge payoff for it. This paper piece right here is what was supplied by Midwest Lumber as the cap shingles for their shingle material. And it is painted to match the shingle material, which is nice, but there is one issue with it. The shingles have a lot of depth because they're cut with gaps in between them. So they have these black lines, which aren't really black, they're shadows. I'm going to have to simulate that on this ridge piece. So I pick up this permanent marker that I have, and this is an archival marker. I bought it at an art supply store at least a decade ago, and it barely ever gets used. It's only used for things like this, but it still works perfectly. So just running down, and everywhere there's a color change on this ridge cap sheet, I am putting a very fine black line just to add some depth to it so it doesn't look like a flat piece of paper that was just painted with miscellaneous colors. I want to give the illusion that it's actually separate pieces all glued in place individually without me going through that work. I contemplated doing individual pieces, but the way these are made with the different colors, the individual pieces, I don't think would have looked right. So this was a better option. Then I use my steel straight edge to bend it in the center, and with a little bit of wood glue, I'm just going to smear it down the center, put a thin film over it, and then I'm going to glue it in place on top of the building. As soon as this touches the building, it grabs into place and pretty much stays there. So you have to be careful to put it in the absolute correct place the first time it touches, because if it doesn't go in the right place, moving it is very difficult. And there it is with the cap shingles installed. And I think we have a winner on our hands. Now, these are pictures of the completed building posed on a mock-up that I made to represent the dock that it's going to be part of on the layout. And I'm very happy with it. This build turned out exactly the way that I wanted it to look. And that doesn't happen often enough, so I'm very happy when it does happen. This is the first building kit that I've built for a railroad in over 5 years. This was a very enjoyable thing to do. Being that I modified this kit so much, you might wonder, why didn't I just scratch build the whole building? It's really the only things that I used out of that Kit of the Month kit from FOS Scale Models was the walls and 2 of the doors. I replaced everything else with titchy windows. I didn't use any of the detail kits parts that came with it. I scratch built an entire dock for it to sit on. Well, the great thing about these kits of the month that FOS Scale puts out is they're just very small buildings that save you the trouble of coming up with motivation and an idea. And you can take these kits, and I didn't build this one exactly the way it's supposed to be. I moved the addition to the rear instead of putting it on the side where it was designed to be. And I swapped the 2 side walls because I wanted the 2 big doors to be very close to each other so you could look in and see the workshop. I didn't have to get these walls square. The laser cutter that FOS Scale used made perfectly square walls. I didn't have to come up with a design or window placement. I had to trim out a couple of the windows because I used different windows, but that was much easier than trying to actually cut all these window openings myself. So for the $40 this kit cost, yes, it was absolutely worth it for me. I actually prefer my kits to come with minimal materials. The chances that the manufacturer of the kit is going to put the details in it that I want is very low. I have boxes and boxes and boxes of detail parts, and I have the detail parts that I need to make any kit look like what I want it to look like. And I would rather choose my own detail parts than use the ones that come in the kit. I would rather be able to add my own floor and add my own shingles and do that rather than buy a kit that comes with shingles I don't like. I've got a kit on the shelf that came with these weird octagonal shingles that I will never ever use. And I wonder how much extra I paid for those in that kit. I might have added $10 or $15 to the cost of that kit, and I'm just going to throw them in the trash. So the fact this came with that tar paper roofing material, which is really nothing than lines printed on paper, is fine with me because I get to choose the color shingles I want. I get to do the roof exactly how I want it to be. And this is the way I like kits to be. I like kits to be just the bare minimum. I do have fine scale miniature kits. I have 10 of those to build that include everything you could possibly ever want, but I'm not going to use the details that come with any of them. I've already built them all in my head at least once, and I know the modifications I'm going to make to them as I do them. So yes, I'm very thankful that FOS Scale makes these kit of the months. I'm glad that I bought the year of these kits that I had because I got these great little kits for the layout. And all in all, this was a great build, and thank you for watching.